Greetings and salutations, friends. Character NPC back at the gaming table. I'm beginning my tutorial on how to play Invasion Malta. Here I have Invasion Laros Scenario 4 set up that I'm playing through. And in this first video, I want to go through talking about the counters themselves, how to read the counters, and also a bit about zone of control, because these are two areas which are common to hex and counter war games, but have been problematic for some people to play this game. So first, let's start with counters. Here you can see a variety of counters. This pretty much represents all of the unit counters that you'll find. There are NATO symbology, pretty standard on wargame counters. If you look up NATO unit symbol and size, you'll get a complete reference to what all of these are. Anyone who's been playing hex and counter war games for a while will know all of these, but in case you don't, you can look it up. Also, the size symbology, you can see we have some platoon scale. We have mostly company scale. Just about everything is company scale with a few exceptions. Here, this headquarters unit has 2 hashes, which represents a battalion headquarters. Here we have platoon, this is company, and air units do not have any symbology. First off, we have the standard attack, defense, and movement allowance numbers on the chits. Here you'll notice that these anti-aircraft units have no movement. These coastal artillery batteries have no movement, while these others have a colored box around them. This red box represents, and the orange box actually, both of these are motorized units. The red box representing self-propelled units versus this orange circle, which represents towed artillery, in this case, an artillery piece. And the significance there is that with the orange circle, the orange movement allowance, they cannot conduct infiltration movement, they cannot retreat, they cannot advance after combat, and their movement is different on certain terrain versus motorized or other units, right, with a standard movement allowance. Also on these counters, common to hex and counter war games, is the identification. You can see here this is 3rd of the 66th. These are just army units. Here you have on the headquarters an actual representation of Kampfgruppe Kuna, which is the name of the unit that this headquarters belongs to. The air units, of course, name what type of aircraft they are. In this case, Ju-87 Stukas versus the Ju-88s. This number, the first number on air units, represents the close air support, and the second one represents the bombardment capability. Of course, fighter bombers being better at bombardment, while the Ju-87 was one of the best close air support type units. Not very fast, but of course everybody knows them, mostly familiar with them through history. So 3 close air support versus 1 bombardment, while the Ju-87, 1 close air support versus 5 bombardment. Here this naval unit has a 6 bombardment factor. Naval bombardment can only be conducted during night turns. Also, we have a range up in the top left corner. However, you'll see one unit here, this coastal battery, San Giorgio, does not have a number in that range, and that represents that it is a coastal battery that's in a fixed position and doesn't have the capability, if you've seen those big old concrete bunkers, they can't turn around and fire, direct fire or even indirect fire back into, France, if you were talking about D-Day, or in this case back to the Laros or the Malta Islands. So I think that's kind of obvious. I'm not going to go into that any further, but if you don't quite understand that, comment and I'll try to get back and answer those questions or remake this video if necessary. Also, we have a number that represents the stacking size. stacking limit of 9 within a hex. So you'll see on the setup cards a lot of times a particular Kampfgruppe for the Germans that are going to be assaulting the island will already have stacks that represent 9. On the opposite side, you have an efficiency rating. An efficiency rating for a unit is how organized, how good it is, how organized are they, how well do they execute commands from headquarters. So this comes into play a lot in this game. You're going to have a lead unit for every combat, which is represented by its efficiency rating, and then die rolls are going to be made to see who's getting unit cohesion. If you have, say, the British or the Germans fighting with the Italians, or even with removing disruption. Italian units, the only way to remove disruption within the recovery phase, Italian units have to roll under their efficiency rating. So this unit with only a 3, this heavy anti-aircraft, is still disrupted from the beginning. Really, this was disrupted even before the first turn. It has not become undisrupted and removed the counter because it failed its efficiency check. Mainly efficiency checks are used for die roll modifiers, but also, again, I mentioned in combat you're going to pick a lead unit. That lead unit will be the first to take damage and also represent, instead of having to roll efficiency ratings and things and get die roll modifiers for every single unit in a stack, it's a way to combine all of those units and say, okay, the efficiency of all of the units that are affected in this battle have this efficiency. Here you can see this headquarters unit has a black oval with a white 1 in the top left corner. That represents command points that it can use to affect efficiency rating checks and combat coordination. Also, we have a yellow stripe. This represents that there is or is not a zone of control. The yellow stripe means that there is no zone of control, while this unit here that does not have a yellow stripe has a zone of control. That's the next thing that I want to talk about. Zones of control are, of course, vital and pretty standard in every Hex Encounter war game, but in this war game in particular, it is a little bit unique. This is the first one that I've ever played where armored fighting vehicles do not have a zone of control, and this represents that these are platoons in size versus there are British armored units in the main Malta I'll call it a campaign, but the largest scenario is really what it is. It has some Matildas and other things that are larger. They're company size, I believe. Maybe there's a battalion, but I believe they're all company size, and they have a zone of control. But most of the time, these tiny islands are so small, you can see how much rough terrain is out here, and they have to stay on roads, so they oftentimes can't take control of the surrounding hexes. Terrain, of course, is the biggest effect in combat here. You can see here an example of a cliff hex side, so units that can't cross this hex side also cannot exert zone of control across that hex side, and of course they can't exert control into full sea hexes here. So make sure that you thoroughly read the zone of control section, because in a lot of Hex Encounter war games, as I said, you would have armored units that would seem much tougher and have zones of control, but in this case they're not. So enemy units are going to be able to walk past them if they need to, or move past them, I guess is the right terminology. Infiltration movement is something that is interesting and related to zone of control as well. I had a unit here. I attacked some units from this hex, but moved within a zone of control because the efficiency rating was greater for the units that were moving to the next hex while this unit was here. So for example, forget that there's a cliff hex side here. This unit, this paratrooper company and this Italian infantry company have differences in their efficiency rating. Since this is an eligible unit for infiltration movement and it is a greater efficiency rating than this infantry unit, it could actually move within that from and to while within this enemy's zone of control. In this case, it's got a cliff hex side here, and this doesn't exert zone of control across this hex side. But, if this was all clear terrain, all things given, clear terrain here, this unit would still be able to move within zone of control, assuming that it could pay the price of movement, and it has a efficiency rating that is higher than this other unit. I won't go into any other detail about either the counters or zone of control. I think that really kind of covers what are the seemingly gotchas about this game. If you played Hex and Counter Wargames, you're going to get the rest of it. You can certainly look things up. Oh, one other thing I should point out. I love historical wargaming, and in this case, I mentioned John Burt's companion book that really goes into great detail about the order of battle and a lot of the different things that would have occurred, I guess you'd say, within Invasion Hercules. But if you're looking for additional detail about what these abbreviations mean, say this B/1KO in this case, this would be information that could be found on page 10 of the scenario book. KO of this British unit represents the King's Own Royal Regiment. So that's it. If I've missed anything, please leave a comment. I'll either redo this or try to get something else out that better represents the missing pieces to this. But I think I've pretty much covered everything that's really important about the counters, how to read them, and zones of control and the differences between zones of control in Invasion Malta versus other hex and chip war games that are commonly played by the community. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.